Everybody welcome Wesley.
Hello. I'm going to take this off because if I don't, I'm going to pass out. As you can all see, I'm very pregnant right now. Well, my name is Westleigh, and I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is 11/15/16, and I'm really grateful for that. I always like to start off my story by just kind of defining alcoholism and what it means to me. For me, what alcoholism is, it's a three-part disease, too, that I think are special to us alcoholics. One that I think is just a general human condition. The first part is I have an allergy to alcohol. What that looks like for me is once I start drinking, I am not going to stop until somebody else stops me or something else stops me. You'll hear in my story that led to a lot of fun places. I am a chronic relapser, so I just kept, all the things the book promises, jails, institution, death, they all were right there for me. Then finally I found AA. And then the next part of the disease is the mental obsession. For me, what that means is when I want something that makes me feel good, I cannot stop thinking about it. I just run in little bitty circles, and my mind will just obsess over that. For a very long time, that was alcohol. And that was part of the reason I couldn't stop drinking, is I had the allergy, knew I had it, but I couldn't get over that mental obsession. So then comes this third part of the disease for me, which is this spiritual malady, this thing that I think all of us humans are born with, but for me specifically is the one hope I was given by this program. That if that is the one way that I'm able to address my allergy I can't change, my mental obsession I can't change, but this spiritual malady I did have some hope for. So hopefully you'll be able to hear in my story a little bit about how I was able to overcome that. In general, I'm going to try to stick to the basic thing of what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. Give you a little bit about my background. I will be turning 30 in September, so I got sober at 25. So I know I like to say that because sometimes when someone's telling a story, you like to go chronologically and be like, okay, they're almost to when they get there. My story is one of those where you're gonna be like, okay, how many times is she gonna relapse? What are we gonna get to when she's 25? So just to give that, I was born to two, loving middle-class parents. I am the middle of two boys. My older brother was really close in age to me. I'm going to talk about some things that were pretty formative, I think, in developing my personality. There were also some obstacles I had whenever I was going to get sober, some things that I had to deal with in order to be able to get sober. The first one of those is growing up, my mom likes to say we moved around a lot as a kid, that I was very. She would go to fill out my new school application, and they put your kid's personality, and it was just very. Whatever Wesley is feeling, she is very much that way. If I was excited, I was the most excited kid, but if I was sad, I was the most sad kid. That's kind of the only way my mom knew how to explain it. And with that, being the alcoholic that I am and believing that this disease of alcoholism is one of a personality defect, I tried to mask that in a lot of ways. The first way I tried to mask that was with food. So growing up, I was really chubby. It's one of those really chubby kids, and my brother, being a year older than me, loved to talk about it, loved to make fun of me. He actually got all of his friends. I was kind of that kid that people would tease and throw Twinkie wrappers at. I was that kind of kid. And so that really had a effect on me growing up because I was made fun of so much. I had a really bad body image, and I struggled with that for a really long time. The second thing that I think was the hardest thing for me to get over is when I was 16, I kind of grew up, and I finally shed all that weight, and for the first time I was feeling accepted. And at the same time, my father took another job in a different town, and we moved there, and I had this opportunity to reinvent myself. And along with that, part of my story is my parents' marriage was always really rough. And they got divorced when I was in middle school, and they remarried each other when I was in high school. And right at the time they remarried each other is when we moved. And so when we moved, it was this new chance. My parents had just gotten back together. I was actually pretty mad about it. We had moved towns. I had this new physique. No one knew me, and I actually was first introduced to drinking. And it was great. It was for the first time in my life, I could fit in, no one knew anything about me. I could be this new image. I actually tried out to be a cheerleader and made it. I was living the dream that I thought I could always have. But along with that, for me in my drinking career, from the very first time I drank alcohol, it was whatever clicked inside of me, I just couldn't stop. So I remember the first time I drank, one of my brother's friends actually got me drunk. And he told me he was giving me vodka, but he was actually giving me Everclear. But what do you know, like blackout by the end of the night, like was the most awesome thing ever. And that's kind of how I drank. But unfortunately, when you're a young girl and you drink to excess, what happened to me when I was 16, I went to prom, the senior prom with one of my brother's friends, and he ended up raping me. I was a virgin. It was a really huge deal in the town. It was really hard because obviously it was my brother's friend, and the way they did things back then was you just swept it under the rug. You weren't supposed to talk about it. And my parents wanted to press charges, but his uncle was the district attorney of the town, and that didn't happen. So ending up moving schools and coming out of that, the only way I knew how to deal with it was kind of the way that I had been raised, which was also very conservatively Christian. So I kind of took on this role of I'm going to be good enough to make up for that. I was told that it was actually my fault what happened to me, that it was because I was living a bad life, which I believed. You're not supposed to drink when you're underage. You're not supposed to hang out with boys late at night. If I could just be a good enough person, I could make up for all of that. So I did. I tried really hard. For the next 4 years, I graduated top of my class in high school, and then I went to a Christian college with the idea of being a missionary doctor. That was what I was going to do. And I went, and this was actually a college that was in my hometown. My mom worked there. My family was really involved, and it was a Christian college, so I was also not only trying to make straight A's, I was also chaplain for my floor. I was super involved in everything. And then I kind of had this falling out. My parents' marriage was falling apart again. At the school, with my mom working there, seeing the really ugly side of things. I knew the president was having an affair with his secretary and all of these things, you know what I mean? All of these background things. And, I kind of had a crisis of faith, and I ended up doing the same thing I had done in high school. I was screw it. I'm going to switch colleges. I'm going to change majors. I'm going to go have fun. I have been being a good girl for a long time, and look where it's gotten me. My parents are getting divorced again. This Christian thing doesn't seem to be real. I'm just going to have fun. And I did. I went to a new school. I joined a sorority. I became vice president of that sorority, and I partied. I was not only the vice president of the sorority, I was the president of when are we drinking, where are we drinking, what's going on. And it was a lot of fun until it wasn't. It actually wasn't very fun for very long if you think about it. I lasted I think the second semester at that school, I had been on track to graduate early. So by the end of that second semester, I was in a place where actually I was raped again. And this was at this point in time when it happened to me, all those things they had said about me when I was in high school, I felt again that had been true. You know what I mean? At this point in time, because in high school I was, looking back, I was a juvenile kid. I had no idea what I was doing. And when I look back in college, what I thought of myself is I should know better. Here I am, drinking to excess, wearing the wrong clothes, all of these things. And I really took that on. And it brought me to this place of how could I let myself do that again? And I got very depressed, and I tried to kill myself. And that wound me up with the only way I knew, I really relate to Bill's story when he's talking about being on that jumping off point, and he's watching all these sales brokers kill themselves. He's but I can't do that, and he just drinks. That's kind of how it was for me. Is I was trying to drink up the courage to do what I thought I had to do. And thank goodness I had people that loved me and that took care of me, and I was not successful. But that was kind of the beginning of the introduction of me trying to quit drinking. At that point, my parents got involved. Even in the midst of their divorce, they kind of focused it on me. They're well, obviously she has a drinking problem. Not the problem with everything else, it's a drinking problem. So they sent me off to rehab, one of those really nice rehabs where it's summer camp. I did not think that when I went. I thought I was in hell. I thought oh my gosh, I don't have a cell phone, I don't have anything, this is the worst. But what I wasn't noticing is they had maids and full service food and people catering to me all the time. It's the easiest chance I ever had to get sober. But I was at that treatment center, and the one thing I remember about it is seeing the 12 steps on the wall and reading step number 1, and it's saying we have become powerless over alcohol because our lives are unmanageable. And that because was huge for me. All I really saw is my life is unmanageable, and if I can fix that, I can drink. You know what I mean? That's all I need to do. So I left that treatment center, and really focusing on that unmanageability part, I had this great idea that the way to get sober was to become a flight attendant. Because what better way to leave all my problems in the dust? I can just run away all the time. So that's what I did. This is so terrible. So I told my parents this lie that I was gonna go visit friends I met in treatment in Dallas. I actually flew from Dallas to Phoenix, Arizona, and secretly interviewed to be a flight attendant. Got the job. I have no idea how. And came back and was like, hey, I'm moving to Arizona. I got this job, and I think they were so grateful to have me out of their hair, given what was going on with them. They were happy for me. And thus started a 6-month blackout that I don't really remember. If none of y'all have anything I'm sure some of you know about the flight attendant field, but basically when you start off, you're on call. So you're getting paid to just wait by the phone. And I was the youngest of the last class for US Airways, so I never got called. So I basically just got to drink for 6 months and get paid to do it, which, by the end of it, always ends the way it does. I was in Connecticut visiting my grandparents for Christmas, who were in their 80s, and they ended up getting a call from the police station because I had fallen asleep in my car. I was on the side of the road. I wasn't driving, but the keys were in the ignition, which stands for a DUI. Gratefully, though, being a cute little girl, they kind of wrote it off, and they were like, you just need help. I think my blood alcohol was pretty high, and they were like, if you just go get counseling, we'll write this off. So my parents ended up, getting me back to Texas. They didn't really know what to do with me. They had paid for the expensive rehab, and they were kind of pissed about it. And of course, they're also paying for divorce attorneys because the divorce went on forever. And so they're like, here, we're gonna put you in this Christian home. They had known this professor that had started this home for addicts and alcoholics, and I went there and was there for about 6 months. And I remember it was late at night, and there was a hailstorm, and we were sitting and we were all holding hands praying, and they were trying to pray the demons off the roof. And I was like, I have to get out of here. This is not working. And so I called my mom, and I told her, and she picked me up, and thus started a very unhealthy codependent, her trying to save me, it not working, her getting mad at me, ended with a very awful thing of she lost her stuff one night, and she beat me with a vodka bottle. I showed up in the hospital to detox, and I was just covered in bruises. And the hospital people were like, we got to get you guys away from each other. So I ended up remembering that when I was in treatment, they gave me one suggestion I hadn't followed, and that was to go to sober living. And so I decided to move down to Kerrville, which is where I had gone to treatment, got into a sober living, and again, it was a location change, and it worked for a little bit. I got down there, and it was really fun. I don't know if any of y'all have spent some time in Kerrville in those sober livings. It is a party, the most fun sober party you can have. I did get a sponsor, I did work the steps, but, for me, I was always looking for that reason outside myself that made me an alcoholic. I wanted that magic thing that I could just focus on and fix to make myself feel better. That was obviously outside of myself. And so I ended up, while I was down there, meeting a lovely young lady and falling in love with her. So when I went back to do my amends to my mother, instead of doing my amends, I came out to her. And I was like, I have found the issue. I am a lesbian. It has been these men in my life that are the issue. I am good to go now. I get back, and unfortunately, that girl did not feel the same way. Cheated on me and started relapsing on heroin, and then also offered me the heroin, and thankfully I didn't take it, but basically I had this broken heart, and then also a huge ego crush because I had done all these things and for nothing. So once again, that set me back off to the races. I used it as an excuse to dive back into drinking. This time I needed another location change, because Kerrville, I couldn't show my face there, you know what I mean, after everything that had happened. So I finally landed up in Dallas. I moved here, and I'm very blessed to have an aunt that's an LCDC out of Connecticut, and she suggested an Oxford House, which I don't know if any of y'all have been through. It was a really great program. I found an Oxford House, and I moved in there, and I started going to meetings. I was kind of dealing with all of these questions about myself, my sexuality and sobriety and how many times I had relapsed, and I still, one thing I haven't mentioned is I had terrible PTSD from the rapes that I had. I would wake up fighting my blankets, just having terrible dreams, and had a lot of anxiety, and it, all those things were still there. And so I get here, and I get in the rooms, and I get a sponsor, but the problem is my ego gets in the way. So all I really remember about my first jaunt in Dallas is I found this young people's group called Whiskey and Milk, and there's all these young people just like me. I loved it, but everybody was like raising their hand at the end of the meeting. I know other people talk about this. Like, all I wanted to do was be a part of and like work those 12 steps so I could also raise my hand. Like, I really wanted to be like part of that group. Like, I'm an overachiever. I'm like, I can do this. So within a month, guess who was raising their hand? Like, I can whip out a 4-step if you want me to. Like, I can get it done. And you know, that didn't keep me going, because it was all basically that time of my sobriety was all fueled with ego. It was all fueled with like, you know, like trying to be involved in every committee, like just do everything I could to make it look good. I was still very empty on the inside. And that wound me up in a very dark place. I was super blessed when I moved here. I'd actually reconnected with a girl I went to treatment with the first time, although she stayed sober, which was actually very lucky, because I wound up relapsing, and she had to pick me up off the floor, basically. And she called my father, and she was like, look, Westleigh is going to die if she doesn't go to treatment. Like, she is on death's door. You've got to send her to treatment. Thankfully, she was so convincing. My dad sent me over to a treatment center, and this one was pretty different. It was very bare bones. It was very much, you're going to do the work. It was a 3-month treatment program, so I was there for a while. And they could kind of see through my bullshit. Like, you could kind of see through like the overachiever stuff. Like, I remember I got there and they had like this huge workbook that was like step 1, like basically like copying the first couple chapters of the big book. And I did it the first night. Like, I woke up the next morning and I was like, look what I did. Like, can I get to step 2? And they were like, no, we're gonna give you another workbook. Like, you can't, you know what I mean? Like, you can't do this. And I remember the same thing happened. I had like done my 4-step and I was like, I'm ready to do my 5th step. And they were like, no, like, you're not ready. And they made me sit on it. Remember specifically one challenge they gave me while I was there that still to this day just like resonates me, as it's so like indicative of my character defects. They gave me a challenge one weekend where I could not help anybody and I could not give any advice, and you know what I mean? And I that whole weekend could not talk. It's like they gave me a silent treatment, and I didn't know what to do with myself. My whole identity was being this like perfect like caregiver, like knows all the answers, and I had nothing to say. It's like I couldn't think of asking like, how are you doing today? Because all I wanted to be was like, how can I fix you? And coming out of that, like I did have a really big break while I was there, and I did my first really well 4-step. I remember it was like, I think like the 3rd week of them not letting me do my 5th step, and I just started like breaking down crying, and I had like this almost like panic attack of like realizing, I think it was after that weekend specifically, and I really realizing my resentments and everything I was holding on to. And then I ended up doing my 5th step. And the guy that did my 5th step was like this 6'6" biker man. And he was like very intimidating. And I remember one of the defects he wrote on there was like raging bitch. And I was like, oh, don't you see me? Like, I'm not. But like the fact is I was. And I remember getting done with that. And I remember like sitting on my like little awful bed. And I had this overwhelming feeling of like, holy crap. Like, it was the first time anyone had like called me out on my crap, and then also I like believed it. You know what I mean? And I remember saying I was so scared. I was so like, how am I gonna fix this? I left that treatment center. They sent me down to Austin because they were afraid of me going back to Dallas and being like the perfect picture that I had been trying to be. And that was probably the hardest bout of me getting sober. Was I was in Austin. I didn't have a car. It was the middle of summer. I was having to walk and ride the bus. I had no money. I had nothing, and I really did try. I got like the hardest sponsor I could find. She worked for this treatment center. She's amazing, but she also like, I remember I'd send her my nightly, and she would like be like, not good enough, do it again. And I would try to do it more, like try to do it better. And then I remember that whole time it was just so run on fear. There was no like hope. It was all just like trying to do better. And at the end of it, I made some other mistakes. I had been with this guy in Dallas, and I went back to make amends to him. And of course, the amends was like, he's like, I just want to be back with you. Like, let's just try it again. And I was like, okay, that's great. You still want me. Like, I'm not like the awful person I thought I was, which never leads to a good thing. And so, in the midst of that, like, I ended up relapsing. And this relapse was also that I had kind of gone back to that same place that I was when I was in college, where I was like, I have tried AA. how many treatment programs now. Like, I know the 12 steps. I've sponsored. I've done a 4-step. Like, I've done nightlies. I've redone nightlies. Like, there's nothing left for me to do. And I remember being so hopeless and, like, drinking myself to death and not caring. Like, I knew I was an alcoholic, but I didn't give a shit anymore. I had nothing left inside of me. And I was really grateful. I woke up in the hospital, and they said I had like a blood alcohol of like 0.4 something. Like, I was really trying to kill myself. And I come to, and I start trying to call people. My dad told me I was dead to him. My mom said, I love you, but I'm not coming to rescue you anymore. And the only people that showed up were people in these rooms. I was let back into the treatment center. I had just left a couple months before on a full scholarship because they believed in me. It's what saved my life. And I went back, and I was truly broken this time. I remember I was going to get a glass of water, and that 6-foot tall biker man, I must have been making a bunch of terrible noise, but he came out. It was like midnight. And I was trying to get water, and my hand was shaking because I had just been drinking so much, and I couldn't hold the water, and I was just sobbing. He put his arms around me, and he was like, of course you did. Like, of course you drank again. And I remember feeling this relief of, like, I'm an alcoholic. This is what we do. Like, I wasn't broken. I was just one of you. And it was, like, the first time that, like, really, really hit home. And so there was a lot more humility and going through the steps. I promise this was my last time. We're done. We reached 25. So I get there, and I'm doing it, and I remember I did this 4-step, and they made me sit on it a little bit, but this time I was like, this is all I got, and it was the same stuff from before. The only difference this time is it was all sober. Like, it was all the same stuff, but I had been sober this time. And what I realized this time is something I didn't realize before, is that, like, I was an alcoholic no matter if I was drinking or not. I kind of had this fallacy before that it was the drinking that made me a bad person, but in the end, it was like I was just broken inside no matter what. I wasn't necessarily a bad person. I was just broken with or without the alcohol. And it really made the difference in the world to me. I'll kind of go through my process of, like, really understanding the steps this time. I talked a little bit about step 1, and for me, like, the biggest thing is it's not because my life is unmanageable, and my life is unmanageable. It's like I said, there's 2 parts to my disease. There's an allergy and there's a mental obsession. Like, they go together. They're not coming apart. I can't fix one and the other goes away. They're both there. And when I came to step 2, I say I grew up really conservative Christian, and I had tons of falling out, and, like, coming to understand the higher power that I do call God, as I understand him now. It was nothing more in the beginning than, like, something wanted me alive, because I sure as hell did not. You know what I mean? The fact that I woke up in that hospital bed with people that would help me, that's something bigger than me, because that's not what I wanted. So there was something out there. He wanted me alive, and the only way I was going to be able to not only be alive, but have some semblance of a happy life was being in AA. So that's kind of where I came back to, because y'all were the only people I saw it in. Step 3 for me was I was very, 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 very good of going through the actions. You know what I mean? Like, I was very good at turning my life over. Like, you want me to do A, B, C, D? Gotcha. But the really hard part for me was doing it with my whole soul, was really turning over my thought life. It's one of those things where, like, I could go to a meeting and I could sit there and not pay a lick attention. There was nothing that was really connecting in my head. It would just fly one ear and out the other, so I really had to work on turning my will over. So for me, it was, like, not only just doing the actions this time, but really, really turning over my thought life. And then, like I said, when I got to the 4th step this time, it was the same stuff. There was nothing magical on it. The biggest difference is, like, I was completely honest. I completely accepted the defects that I was given. But I remember this time when I had done my 5th step and I was sitting on my bed doing 6 and 7, there was a much different time. There wasn't this anxiety of how am I going to fix this. There was this complete relief of God's got me. You know what I mean? Like, there was this complete difference of, like, okay, like, these are it. Like, I'm gonna give over to God. And there was a much different, like, there was a sense of urgency, but it was more of just kind of the fact that, like, I was more ready to turn it over, And then moving on to steps 8 and 9, obviously after, I think it was almost 4 years of trying to get sober, like I said, when I called my family this time, they were pretty much done with me. There was nothing that they wanted to have anything to do with me. And it was a very long journey. My mother was the first person to come back into my life, but it was really hard. I had to learn, I had all that anger of her beating me and all of those things, and I had to really come to this point of like loving my mother for who she was. That was a big part of my 4-step and my amends, is remembering that like my parents are not these people that I have made them out to be. They're not these like created people that I have given these assigned roles to be. Like, you watch TV and you're like, these are what parents are supposed to be. No, my parents are the parents that God gave me. Like, God gave me the parents, and like they're the ones I'm supposed to have because they're the ones that are there. Like, God is everything or he's nothing. And I had to learn how to be in a real relationship with my mother. It was a few months down the road that I called my father, and he allowed me back into his life, but it was a long journey. He was very emotionally distant. He did not let himself love me for about, I think 2 years was the first time I ever really saw him like really open up to me. And that was pretty hard in the beginning because, in the beginning I wanted to be hurt. I wanted to be like, well, he doesn't love me. He's not affectionate with me. He doesn't care about me. And then the thing is like I had hurt him so much he couldn't. He didn't have the emotional capacity. And, the gift now is that I am a safe person to love where I wasn't before. There are some other amends that I'll focus on just because it's one amends that I remember getting that's actually been one of the biggest joys in my life is, I called my grandparents who had unfortunately witnessed an incident in Connecticut when I got the DUI, and I told them I was sober and I wanted to make amends, and I asked them how I could make it right. And my grandmother was like, just call us once a week so we know you're okay. And I've done that every single day every single week since I've got sober. And what's been really cool is now I look forward to it. Like I actually called my grandma this morning, and now it's like a 30-minute conversation, and I just love it. Like she sent me a picture of her being like a drum majorette and like was reminiscing. Like it's been such a huge joy in my life where I remember back then it being like every week. Like you want me to call you every week? But it's really helped me get through some really hard times having that connection, and it's been a huge source of joy. So continue to do that. I didn't really have any amends that I wasn't super willing to do. There was amends that I held off on because I thought it was better. I had a friend I grew up with in Connecticut that I had also hurt when I was up there, and I wanted to make the amends in person. So I waited 1.5 years until I could afford a plane ticket, and I reached out to her, and she told me to go to hell. She told me that it had been way too long, and that, who was I to reach out after that, and that the best thing I could do was she never wanted to hear my name again. And I did that, and I kind of learned a lesson that like sometimes when we try to organize the perfect plan, it doesn't really work out. So it's better to work on faith, but I'm really grateful that, if nothing else, that I at least was able to reach out and make that attempt. Going into 10, 11, and 12 for me, it's really kind of changed over the years what that looked like. Like I said, at one point in my sobriety, it was sending my nightly to my sponsor. And now it's a lot more of like having a quiet communion with God and really, really taking time in the morning. Like upon awakening, the first thing I do is do my morning readings. And then I pray and I meditate. I love to do a reflection on loving kindness, which is a Buddhist tradition that I learned. And then in the evenings, it really is going through my day and like just kind of doing a spot check inventory. Like, is there anything I need to bring into my morning meditation tomorrow? But it's not as rigid as it used to be. It's a lot more fluid. It's a lot more God-centered. It's a lot more about me staying in that constant contact with God. And the 11 step has been like that for me. Like I said, when I got sober, my idea of God was very simple. It was very much just something wants me alive. And there's been an exploration in my sobriety. I remember I was in a meeting a couple of years ago, and I was talking about like how big my God was getting. And I can't remember who it was, but he was like, honey, God's the same size. You're just getting smaller. And I was like, what? Like I remember it just like blew my mind, and I was like, oh my gosh, like. But it's true. Like I think that's really been my sobriety. Is like God hasn't changed size, but it's like I've been able to gain these really cool perspectives on them, and a lot of them have been through people in these programs. I've heard your stories about how you connect with them. I've been able to see beautiful things of like, sponsees going to church and having a really great experience. I went to a Buddhist temple and had a really great experience. It's been so cool to watch God just bring himself into my life in so many ways, could be just being open-minded to it. And then for step 12, Sponsorship has been the greatest honor in my life. When I was newly sober this time, I went a lot to Nexus, and I had a lot of sponsees. I had a lot of practice. There's a lot of 1, 2, 3, a lot of 1, 2, 3 done, 1, 2, 3 done. But it was really good practice, and then I was super blessed. I've had a couple long-team sponsees who have made it through the 12 steps into sponsorship, and I've had some girls go back out. But the cool thing is I have 2 sponsees that have gone back out that still talk to me. They still call me and ask me for advice, ask me how I'm doing, and it's been really cool to watch just how this relationship can change. And it's been the coolest thing to sit across from a woman and tell her my deepest, darkest secrets and tell her all these things that have happened to me and watch how my experience can help them and how they're like, oh, I'm not so alone. And then the harder part of step 12, practicing these principles in all our affairs. That was really hard for me. Getting sober, like I said, my biggest thing with getting sober is realizing that I had alcoholism of the brain. And that mental obsession for me was really hard. The desire to quit drinking pretty much went away after a couple months of getting sober, but the desire for other things did not quite, other things that make me feel good. I had a huge problem with codependency and dating relationships, and that first year of sobriety, I think I dated half of my home group, and not in the best way. And I remember I was kind of just jumping from relationship to relationship, and I finally got to this point where I dated this really nice guy, but just nothing in common with me. And I got done with it, and I was done. And so my sponsor challenged me to not date, so I didn't date for 6 months. I redid my Sane and Sound. And I had a pretty basic Sane and Sound of I want them to be sober. I want them to be nice. Didn't really work out. And I spent this 6 months being very, very, very intentional. I wrote down some things on my Sane and Sound that were I only bring this up because it's really funny. I'm I want them to get up the same time or earlier than me. That's really important. And God love my husband. He gets up at 5:30 in the morning and is a bright, happy clam that won't be quiet. It's kind of the curse of what I wanted, but I did. And I also prayed that the next person I met would be the person that I married. That was my intention. I was ready. I had always been really scared of marriage. Through redoing my Sane and Sound and doing some work in therapy, I realized that I was more afraid of having my parents' marriage. And I was able to redefine that. Just like I was able to redefine God, I could redefine anything. And what do you know? I got tricked into a date with another guy from my home group, which, I guess was just the way God meant me to find somebody. And I went on that first date. I remember seeing a friend the next day, and I was like, oh my gosh, I think this is the one. And he was, and it happened pretty quickly. He invited me to go to India to meet his family. So in 6 months, I got to go to the Taj Mahal in India, and I got to see all that. And he ended up proposing to me there, and we ended up getting married about 9 months later. And one thing I like to say about that is, I married somebody in the program, and I thought it would be great. I thought he would know exactly what I was going through all the time. What do you know? You can't sponsor them. You can't tell them to call their sponsor. You can't tell them to go to meetings. It's really hard. I remember saying that pause when agitated or doubtful. I did not understand what that meant until you have to sleep next to somebody that you're trying to pause about. You know what I mean? Pausing when agitated or doubtful is really different when you can't leave the room. And it's been such a good challenge for my sobriety, is learning how to be in a relationship with somebody who has a brain like we do that understands but may work a little bit different of a program. I've had to learn grace. I've had to learn that not everybody does things the way that I do. You know what I mean? And really being able to have separate programs, and when we're going through problems, it's not me fixing him, it's me working on myself more, which has actually been really great. I want to wrap up my time by talking about just some of the biggest challenges in sobriety that have been the biggest gifts that have come out of it. There's 3 things that have happened that I think are really pivotal, and were kind of make it or breaks it for me. When I was 1.5 years sober, I was working for a company, and I had this boss, and he was always been kind of sweet on me, made comments and been really that. And it always made me uncomfortable, but I kind of brushed it off. Well, come to the point that he was being so attentive to me that it didn't just bother me, it bothered my coworkers. And there had been some things that he said that I knew were highly inappropriate, and it got brought to HR. I remember being called into HR and her repeating the comments that were said about me, and I just being like, oh my gosh, that same thoughts that I had when I was a teenager, like, was I wearing too tight of dresses? Like, was I being too friendly to him? And thank goodness for this program. I called my sponsor and I talked about it, and she was like, no, you didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing you need to change about yourself. Like, I know you're a sober woman now. We'll work through this together. And so it was a huge thing that they needed evidence of stuff, and he had been texting me personally. And I ended up being able to bring that charges to HR and find out that I wasn't the only one that it happened to. He had been doing it to other women in the group, and that's one thing I didn't say about when I was 16. The guy that raped me had also done it to other girls, and we weren't able to do anything about it. But this time, being the sober woman that I was, having all the support that I was, we were able to get him out of the company. And it was a huge thing for me to like be able, it was like, what I thought was the end of the world ended up being this super healing process where like God came in and like healed an old wound, where I was too scared when I was 16 to do the right thing. And at 25 or 26 was able to like get to relive that and get to like bring justice to a situation. It's really cool. The second thing is it's COVID. So we all went through COVID. We all went through it differently. I decided to take a break from AA. Thought it was really fun to like not go to meetings and to kind of sit on my butt and not do anything. And I got fired by my sponsor. What do you know? And it was one of those things where like I remember I got fired and me and my husband were about to buy a house, and I freaked out because like I hadn't been seeing anybody. I hadn't been going to meetings. I was like, what am I going to do? And it was kind of this make or break it moment for me. And God just happened to bring a person to my mind. And I was able to reach out to Adrian actually and get her number, and I was like, and I called her up, and it's been like the most amazing thing. It was exactly what I needed. It was someone in the program who is married to an alcoholic, has gone through a lot of things that I have gone through, and it's been such a productive thing. So just one of those things where like God was this opportunity where I could have gone one of two ways, and I ended up being able to go in a really positive way that actually helped my sobriety. And then the last thing that I'll talk about, just to give you an example of what my program looks like recently, recently, as you know, I am very pregnant, and my baby is coming, and, dealing with the anxiety of that, like dealing with the anxiety of like worrying about like our baby has a 90% chance of being an alcoholic, so we've got to have a college fund and a rehab fund. You know what I mean? And there's been a lot of fear, and it's been like, it's been very hard for me to like, not go into old ways of managing it, not trying to like manage things and fix things. And it's been this thing of like, I was in a ton of fear, and I really wasn't acting the right way. I was like kind of focusing on like my old eating stuff, where I was like managing that really closely and like trying to manipulate my husband and like trying to do all these things. And like the cool thing is AA works for that too. And what I was able to do, I was able to talk to my sponsor, I was able to do some third step work, and I was able to be like, you know what, I'm going to find a home group that's close to where I live, and I'm going to start going to more meetings. And guess what? It's gotten better. Like here I stand at like ready to meet my son in 3 to 6 weeks, and like I feel really good about it now. Like I feel like not only is my nursery's obviously prepared, but like spiritually I'm prepared. I've got a wonderful home group 5 minutes from my house where I have a bunch of ladies. I've got a great gunkle that's gonna come babysit my child and steal me away. I've got sponsor and sponsees and just this wonderful group of people. And I was in a meeting yesterday, and I was just sharing like I don't really know how people do it without AA. Like, I truly stand here so grateful for everything that I've gone through, because I get to live this life. Like, I don't know how people go through life without the support that I do. Like, not just having a higher power, but having people who have a higher power. Like, getting all these people that, like, when I tell them about a problem, they're like, have you prayed about it? Like, have you helped somebody else? Like, these things that actually work for the issues that I have in my life, that have just given me this immense amount of peace. It hasn't been an easy ride. It's a roller coaster. I'm not always perfect, but in the end, when I trust God, clean house, and help others, my life is pretty peaceful, and that's really the biggest gift that I have. So with that, I thank you all for listening. Thank you, Adrian, for asking me to share, and that's it.